Welcome to Pacific Northwest in Mount Rainier National Park. In today's video, we'll be snorkeling our way down the mountain, starting out in a subalpine pond, then a subalpine lake, before finally diving into the confluence of snowmelt and glacial rivers. Tag along for an underwater adventure as I explore the aquatic environments of Mount Rainier National Park. Now, you can't snorkel everywhere in Mount Rainier National Park. Like this beautiful lake right here is a protected area where you're not allowed to swim, fish, or snorkel. But I did talk to the rangers, and there are a few places that you can snorkel. You just have to venture a little further afield. Forgot to say this earlier, but it is time to suit up. I'm halfway there already. To start off, we're exploring some subalpine ponds and lakes. So we're pretty high up. I think we're probably around 6,000 some feet. There's a really shallow pond here. And hopefully we'll see some cool wildlife. In accessing these areas, it's really important to remember, never make a new trail to anywhere. Also, you just want to be as gentle and careful as you can. So right now I'm on a log. It's dead and fallen into the water, so I can not disturb the bottom as much as possible when I get in, and it can also get out without eroding the bank. Got this guy today, traveling pretty light, so kind of bare minimum kit, but that's what we're working with. Here goes nothing. As my head broke the surface, I was surprised to find the water, although still cold, wasn't quite as freezing as I expected it to be. And then, as soon as I whipped the camera around, I was greeted by this long-legged amphibian, the Cascades frog. As it turns out, there were a handful resting in the water at the edge of the pond right near my entry log. Cascades frogs are a common species native to the Pacific Northwest. They tend to inhabit higher altitude aquatic environments, usually above 2,000 feet in elevation. These frogs are mostly just chilling on this fine September day. Breeding season is typically in the springtime, and tadpoles are fully developed by the fall. The dive was off to a great start. Given that alpine and even subalpine ecosystems are fairly extreme environments, I hadn't really expected to see all that much life beneath the surface. I continued on, working my way along a sunken log and around a small clump of aquatic grasses. The patch of grass was beautiful in the morning light, and I'm not sure why there was just one patch right here. But as I was wondering about that, a wild-looking creature caught my eye. If you aren't familiar with the world of salamanders, your first guess might be that this is an axolotl. But axolotls, however, actually live in caves in Mexico, and I'm in Washington. This is in fact a northwestern salamander. This fella was pretty big for a salamander, and the branching gills behind his head stuck out like a mane. I was able to get fairly close before it blasted off into the grass. I quickly began to see salamanders all over the place. They seemed to be peeking out at me from all directions along the bottom of the pond. This little guy was clinging so tightly to this blade of grass. Arguably, this is the cutest amphibian I've ever seen in my life. I began to realize there was a remarkable difference in sizes between the salamanders. This little guy is a larval salamander. We're often well aware of frog metamorphosis, but some folks might not realize many salamanders experience this too. Larval salamanders have gills, which they often lose in their final adult form. I begrudgingly left this adorable salamander behind and continued to snorkel along the edge of the pond. My initial thought was that all of these salamanders were in the aquatic larval stage, waiting to become terrestrial adults. However, northwestern salamander populations are known to be polymorphic, meaning adults occur in a variety of forms. There are individuals that transform into full-blown terrestrial adults, but there are also individuals who never transform, but instead retain their gills and aquatic adaptations. To further complicate things, some individuals will transform, but only under extremely specific environmental conditions. As it turns out, high elevation populations tend to be dominated by aquatic adults, which makes perfect sense based off what I was encountering in the pond. I did manage to find one adult in the terrestrial form, but apparently he was enjoying a day off from terrestrial biz. Honestly, me too, buddy. That's why I make these videos. There had to be hundreds of salamanders in this little pond, and honestly, I couldn't have been more thrilled to stumble into their aquatic kingdom. The pond itself, aside from the small clump of grass and boatloads of salamanders, was somewhat barren. However, I noticed these translucent green jelly-like blobs all along the bottom. At the time, I had no idea what the heck I was looking at. This looked like a green brain straight out of a science fiction tale. As it turns out, these gelatinous blobs are Ophidium. Each blob is a colony of microscopic cells that forms a symbiotic relationship with green algae, giving it that acidic hue. These creatures may look kind of gross, but they can actually indicate a pretty healthy freshwater environment, and they also aid in nutrient cycling and serve as a food source for different organisms. There were definitely plenty to go around in the pond. As I looked down below me, I could see dozens of salamanders hiding out between the jelly balls. What a world. I came across another little salamander perched on this log, and couldn't help but think he looked like a tiny dragon, ready to take flight. Honestly, the frilly gills kind of reminded me of a miniature version of Toothless from How to Train Your Dragon. I couldn't believe it, but some of the little dragons actually did take off into the water column. I would just be snorkeling along, and then all of a sudden, there they were, just floating in their golden underwater world. By this point, it was high time for me to continue working my way down the mountain. But man, what a start to the day. Another couple important things to note: amphibians are super sensitive to disease or any kind of contaminant in their environment. My wetsuit has been cleaned and drying in the sun for a week prior to this trip. Always just a good idea to make sure your gear is cleaned before getting in a small aquatic system that's just going to be pretty sensitive to anything that gets introduced. So, good to know. As the turquoise waters closed over my head, I could immediately tell that the visibility was top-notch. The midday sun pierced the surface like 1,000 swords, and as far as I could see, it was all sunbeams. Despite having no weight belt and no fins, I did my best to dive down towards the bottom. it didn't work very well, but I was able to get a glimpse of what we're working with. The bottom of the lake was like an open savanna, as the clear water allowed for a surprising amount of short vegetation to grow. I had to hunt pretty far and wide for signs of wildlife, but eventually I stumbled across a lonely fish. This is an eastern brook trout. These fish are native to the Appalachian Mountains, and if you've watched my other videos, you've seen me encounter them there. But they were introduced to Washington in the late 1800s and have become an invasive species in several areas of the Pacific Northwest, often competing for resources with native fish species and eating other native wildlife. They are a pretty fish though, I have to say, and their markings make them almost indistinguishable amidst the sun rays reflecting off the bottom of the lake. I then made my way to a grassy section of the lake. Similar to the pond, the grass seemed to grow more densely in specific areas of these water bodies, but rather than just a patch, this spot was like a sparse little forest. At the edge of the grasses, I noticed a shape jutting up from the bottom of the lake. Closer inspection revealed it to be a dead trout, standing tail up like a decaying monument on the lake bed. I couldn't tell what had led to his demise, but it was covered in a thin layer of jelly-like material, not so different from the Ephrodium colonies I had encountered earlier. I'm afraid this mystery will remain unsolved, however, and I began making my way back to the other side of the lake. Alright, so as expected, not a ton of life in these subalpine lake ecosystems. Most of what I was seeing out there today were eastern brook trout, which is kind of weird. Less than a month ago, I was in habitat where we need more of them and it's good to see them, and then out here they're introduced and they're not native. You might be wondering why there are no salamander larvae here. Those larvae require those really high altitude small ponds in order to survive, and ponds that don't have fish in them. So still a really neat ecosystem. The water clarity is amazing. And some of those aquatic plants, it's really, really cool to see that growing up here, way up in the mountains. Our next location is a Snowmelt River. First, I have to cross an angry glacier-fed river to get there. Eventually, I'll be snorkeling at the Confluence, where the snowmelt and this glacier river meet. The Snowmelt River was small, and even though rocks and boulders blocked my view, I could still tell that the visibility was stunning. Icy blue water rushed around me as I crawled along the colorful riverbed. What I believe are mostly native red band trout darted all about as I explored the cracks and crevices beneath the small cascades of the river. As I continued downstream, I eventually ran into a snag that wasn't at all snorkelable. However, there were still plenty of trout hanging out in the area. But it was time for me to pop back out and make my way all the way down to the Confluence. Alright, you guys know how much I love a confluence, and this is one heck of a confluence. So this is where a Snowmelt Creek meets a Glacier River. It's not a very big area, but man, that's beautiful. So I'm gonna get in and swim from the Snowmelt a little ways into the Glacier River without getting swept downstream. It's gonna be really cold, but should be pretty stunning underwater. So here we go. I could see it in the distance, like a wall of smoke on the horizon. Behold, the Confluence. I was really hoping to see just any kind of wildlife in the Confluence itself, but by this point, I'd just about given up on that pipe dream. But then, a single trout materialized amidst the underwater dust storm, and I followed him with my camera as he swam the liquid line between snow and glacier. These fish require pristine, cold, fast-flowing, and unobstructed waterways to survive, and it was awesome to get a glimpse of even just one fish able to move freely between these vastly different aquatic ecosystems. I then waded out into the chaotic, muddy cold of the Glacier River. I could hear the deep rumbling of rocks hurtling downhill around me beneath the surface of the rushing water. It was so cold the water felt like needles hitting my face and hands. It was certainly the coldest snorkeling I'd experienced so far. I quickly confirmed that the visibility was indeed absolute zero. But as I looked up, I could see Rainier in the distance and the very glacier from which this river is born. The Snowmelt's water was cold enough, but that Glacier River, oh man, that is coldest chocolate milk I've ever been in. It's easy to look up at all 14,411 feet of Rainier and feel moved by its beauty. But this breathtaking volcano is so much more than just an inspirational symbol or place. It's the beating heart of this entire region. With 28 glaciers adorning its peak, this mountain gives birth to 5 major rivers, and the amount of life that depends on the survival of this pointy little part of our planet is staggering. Multiple tribes of indigenous peoples have depended upon this mountain for thousands of years, and still do today. They all have many different names for the mountain that loosely combined and translated sound like Tacoma or Tahoma. There are a lot of complexities to the meaning behind the names, but they generally contain the ideas of life force and source of life. In a world that often ignores environmental threats in the face of progress and power, this relational connection to the landscape is something we humans need now more than ever. I'm just glad I got a chance to take a peek beneath the surface of the many veins and pools of that mountain's life force. That was awesome. Not bad for just one day to snorkel different environments in Mount Rainier National Park. Also, I mean, look at this forest. How cool is that? Man, Pacific Northwest, it's pretty sweet. Anyways, thank you guys for watching, and as always, I will see ya next time. Also, a big thank you to my wife Sarah and Finn, who hiked all around Mount Rainier with me while I snorkeled.